A story is told that the Tzemach Tzedek once came home from Cheder when he was a young boy, and he told the Alter Rebbe, his grandfather, what he studied in the school. He told his grandfather that he was taught Vayechi Yaakov be'eretz Mitzrayim sheva esrei shana, that Yaakov lived in Mitzrayim for 17 years. His teacher translated the word 17 according to the gematria. 17 equals the word toiv, good. And therefore he translated based on the Baal HaTurim that Yaakov Avinu lived his best years in Mitzrayim. And Yaakov Avinu asked his grandfather, Zaidi, how is it possible that Yaakov Avinu should live his best years in Egypt? Ervas Haaretz, the most immoral of all lands at that time. And his grandfather responded, we read earlier, Ves Yehuda Sholach Lefonav Goishna, that Yaakov, before he went down to Egypt, sent Judah to Goshen to establish a base Talmud, to establish a yeshiva there where they can study Torah throughout all the years in Egypt. And therefore when a Jew has Torah, he has the light of Torah, then he has Goshen, which means to get closer. He gets closer to God even in the land of Egypt. So what is the power of Torah that it carries us through exile, through every Egypt? And what are the laws of Torah? Who is obligated to study the Torah? And what is the purpose of the study of Torah? We start with the Pshat, the simple level, then the Remiz and Drush and Soid and Chassidus, and to try to understand the study of Torah on these various levels. First and foremost, the Alter Rebbe writes in the laws of Hilchos Talmud Torah, in the laws of the study of Torah. He says like this, Shekol nefesh mi Yisrael, every soul of Israel, tzricha lavoi bil gulgulim rabim, needs to come down to this world in many reincarnations, ad shet tikayim kol hatayag mitzvahs b'maaseh b'dibur u'b'machshava. The soul has to come down to the world many times until the soul fulfills all 613 mitzvahs of the Torah in action, in speech, and in thought. What does that mean in speech and in thought? This obviously means the limud, the study of Hilchosei and the laws of all the 613 commandments of the Torah. And then he goes on to say not only to understand it on a simple level, but to also be oisik, to be preoccupied in the study of the esoteric level of Torah as well. And furthermore, the Alter Rebbe writes in Tanya, not only to study it, but also to be mechadish, that every soul has the ability and the responsibility to innovate on all four levels of the Torah. And therefore he concludes in the law in Hilchos Talmud Torah, chapter 1, law number 4, Ashrei mi shebal lekan v'talmudei biyadei. Fortunate is one who comes here to paradise, and his talmudei, his study, his knowledge of Torah is in his hand. What does that mean? That the person studied all 613 mitzvahs of the Torah, on all levels of the Torah, and therefore the soul does not need to be reincarnated again. So fortunate is one who comes here with all his knowledge in his hand, and therefore he can stay in paradise. This is the Pshat. And similarly, the Alter Rebbe writes in chapter 47, pertaining to the laws of Birchas HaTorah, the laws of making a bracha on the Torah, he says, Tzarech lizar ba miyoid, one should be very careful to make a bracha before they study the Torah, asher bracha banim b'kol amim, right? Every bar mitzvah boy knows this. Asher bracha banim b'kol amim, v'naslanu yisrasei, baruch atah Hashem noisan HaTorah, blessed be God who gives the Torah every day anew. You have to be careful, he says, to make a bracha before you study the Torah. Shalei charva haaretz, For the land was not destroyed, ella only mipnei shlei baruchu b'Torah tchila, only because the sages did not make a bracha before they studied the Torah. And therefore it's very important for both men and women, and of course children, when they study Torah, to first make the bracha on the Torah. So this is the pshat. The pshat is that every person, every soul comes down to the world to study the entire Torah, at least on the level of halacha. And therefore today, by studying the Rambam, the entire Rambam, all 14 books of code, or at least learning the Sefer HaMitzvos of the Rambam, a person has the ability to learn all the 613 mitzvos of the Torah. And then, in addition to that, also to try to learn the esoteric level of these mitzvos, and to try to fulfill them as much as possible. This is the pshat. What's the remez? So, we find the Gemara tells us in Shabbos as follows. Rav Hamnuna teaches us, Lo charva Yerushalayim. Why was Jerusalem destroyed? Ella b'shvil, only because Shabbat luba tinokei shel beis Rabban. Because the yeshivas, the chadarim, the study houses of children were nullified and ceased to be. And because they stopped teaching children Torah, therefore Jerusalem was destroyed. And we find furthermore in the Gemara of Gittin, on page 58, side 1, it says over there, and how many schools were there? So the Gemara gives an example that in Beitar alone, there were 400 synagogues, and each of these 400 synagogues had 400 teachers, and each of these 400 teachers taught 400 students. And because they ceased to teach, and the children were no longer learning the Torah, therefore Jerusalem was destroyed. So the remez, the hint to how to bring about the coming of Mashiach, is that we have to try to do our best to teach children and to inspire children to go and study Torah. And if they have no money or they can't afford it, to try to support these children in the study of Torah. And by doing so, we bring about the Geula, we bring about the redemption. What is Drush? The homiletics. We find an interesting thing both in the Rambam and also in the Shulchan Aruch of the Alter Rebbe. And that is both of them, when they talk about the laws of study of Torah, they begin by saying that it's an obligation for a father to teach his child Torah. And then only after that does it say that one has the obligation to learn or study Torah on their own. Now you would think it's the opposite. First you study Torah on your own, then you teach children. Because how can you teach your children or your students Torah if you yourself are not knowledgeable in the Torah? Now it's true that when it comes to chinuch, when it comes to educating children, there's only the mitzvah of teaching them Torah. When it comes to the other 612 mitzvahs of the Torah, there's no obligation according to Torah law to teach a child under bar bat mitzvah. That is only rabbinic law that tells us that a child under bar bat mitzvah, you should teach him all the laws of the Torah and get them accustomed to fulfilling them. But when it comes to the study of Torah, there's an obligation according to Torah law, Vishinantam livanecha, you shall teach your children. So every child already has to start learning Torah as a child. So the Rambam writes in mitzvah number 11, based on this verse that we say every day in the Shema, Vishinantam livanecha, that this is called the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. And it is a mitzvah to study Torah and to teach the wisdom of the Torah to others. And actually in the Kapach interpretation of the Rambam, he says first that it's an obligation to teach children and then an obligation to learn on your own. So the question is, why why would the Rambam and similarly the Alter Rebbe tell us that the mitzvah of Vishinantam Levanecha, the mitzvah to teach your children, is first a mitzvah to teach children, then you should learn Torah on your own? And one answer to the question is that when it comes to the study of Torah, we have to be children. What does that mean? That we should feel that we are incomplete, that we are yet not knowledgeable in the Torah. Because once we feel that we have studied the entire Torah, once we feel that we know it all, then we no longer want to study the Torah. So therefore, when it comes to the mitzvah of limud Torah, the mitzvah of study of Torah, we are told you should be like a child. And that is, always realize and admit and acknowledge that there's more to learn. And there's another opinion, and there's another way to look at it. And by doing so, one will have the ability to truly learn more and more Torah and become more and more knowledgeable with the Torah.
May I ask a point?
The Soid, what is the esoteric insight into the learning of Torah? There are 5 levels to the study of Torah. There's Pshat, the simple level, there's Drush, there's Remes, Drush, Soid and Chassidus. These 5 levels, however, says Kabbalah, allude to the 5 levels of the neshama, the 5 levels of the soul. So we have the level of nefesh, ruach, neshama, chay, yechida. These are the 5 levels of the soul. So the level of nefesh, that corresponds to the level of pshat, the simple interpretation. The level of ruach, that corresponds to remez, which is the hint. The level of neshama corresponds to drush, the homiletic. The level of chaya, this is corresponding to the level of soid, the esoteric. And then the 5th level of the soul, which is yechida, which means to become one with God, this alludes to the level of chassidus. What does chassidus say about the study of Torah? Chassidus starts with a question, and that is, how is it possible that a finite mind, a finite human mind, should be able to comprehend an infinite knowledge of Torah? Torah is God's knowledge, God's wisdom, and God is infinite. So how is it possible that a finite mind can truly comprehend infinite wisdom? And Chassidus goes on to give an example that one would not fathom that an elephant should have any possibility of squeezing through the eye of a needle. The eye of a needle is very small. An elephant is very, very large. There's no way to squeeze an elephant through the eye of a needle. You wouldn't even dream of such a thing. Yet the Torah is much larger than an elephant, and our mind, compared to the infinity of the Torah, is smaller than the eye of a needle. So how can the eye of a needle, the human mind, comprehend the Torah, which is infinite? This is the question Chassidus asks. And Chassidus says the only way that we can truly comprehend Torah is through bittul. The secret of acquiring Torah is bittul, which means self-nullification. And that is to acknowledge that I am finite, to acknowledge that I am a human being, and it's only because of God's mercy and God's love and God's kindness that He allows us to comprehend His wisdom through the Torah. How do we create this bittul? By making a bracha. By making a bracha before we study the Torah. By saying, Baruch atah Hashem noisen HaTorah. You are God who are the giver of the Torah. Every day you give the Torah anew. And therefore, every day you put yourself into the Torah. And you give man the ability to acquire and understand the Torah. This bittul, this self-nullification, creates a vessel to allow us to be able to acquire Torah. Furthermore, Chassidus says, what is the real objective of Torah? It's not only that we study Torah to know what to do, but the true objective of Torah is to become one with God, who is the giver of the Torah. As we said earlier, the fifth level of Torah is Chassidus, which is Yechida. And that is, by studying Torah, we become one with God. And this explains another interesting halacha, or teaching in the Talmud. The Talmud says, what's the secret to knowing the Torah? The secret to knowing the Torah is you should articulate the Torah with your mouth. If you're simply going to read the Torah with your eyes and understand it with your mind, but you don't talk it out or read the Torah, then eina mishtameres, it will not be protected. But if you do talk the Torah out, then mishtameres, it will be protected. Similarly, we find a halacha that says, if you think Torah, you don't need to make a bracha of Nosein HaTorah. But if you talk Torah, then you have to make the bracha of Nosein HaTorah. So what is the difference between simply thinking Torah or speaking Torah? And the answer is that by the fact that we speak Torah, this creates humility. And humility is the vessel for acquiring this Torah. Why is speech a level of humility? The answer is that the human being has something over all the animals of the world. And that is, we are intellectuals. We have a mind, we can contemplate, we can think, we can meditate, we can understand, we can derive. These are things that animals cannot do. So if we are only going to acquire Torah with our minds, with our intellect, that alone is through arrogance. That look, we are smarter than all the other creatures, therefore we have the ability to acquire Torah. But in truth, we're still finite. And therefore, our finite mind really cannot comprehend God's infinite wisdom. Therefore, says the Gemara, that if you will speak the Torah, and you will lower yourself down from the level of intellect to a level of speech, which is something that even animals can do. They can talk to one another. So that will create within you this level of humility. And by creating within you that level of humility, you will now become a worthy vessel of receiving the Torah. And then, mishtameres, the Torah will be protected, and you will be able to remember the Torah, and the Torah will truly be one with you. And this is also connected with Chanukah. What happened at Chanukah? We read and we recite in the liturgy of Chanukah that the Syrian Greeks wanted lashkicham teiresecha. They wanted us to forget God, your Torah. We don't simply say they wanted us to forget the Torah or Torah, but rather lashkicham teiresecha. They wanted us to forget your Torah. They wanted us to forget the God in the Torah. The Syrian Greeks said, take God out of the Torah. Make the Torah simply an intellectual book, an intellectual teaching, and study Torah because it's a beautiful concept, like all other works of literature. And therefore came along Chanukah and said, no, the Maccabees fought for the purity in Torah. That Torah is not only an intellectual work, a beautiful work, but the Torah is unique because it's the only work in the entire universe that is God's teachings, God's knowledge. And that came about through the battle that they fought against the Syrian Greeks. And then they went into the Beis HaMikdash, and they found one cruse of oil, of holy oil, of oil that was pure and not contaminated, to show that the Torah has to be a book that is pure. What does that mean? To acknowledge that it's God's Torah. And with this bittul, with this humility, and with this love for God, and with the bracha, and blessing and acknowledging God, the giver of the Torah, we will truly be worthy of receiving God's Torah. A friend of mine told me many years ago that his father was once talking to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe said, what do you do Shabbos afternoon? So he said, I used to study some Gemara, but I used to fall asleep on the Gemara. So I felt I'm embarrassing the Gemara, and therefore I take a nap instead. So the Rebbe said, the sleep that you have over the Gemara is more geschmack. It's a more pleasurable sleep when you sleep over the Gemara than when you take a nap on Shabbos. So you should continue to study the Gemara on Shabbos. And then I saw in another letter that a person writes to the Rebbe that I used to go to a class, and I used to learn at that class, Talmud. But what happened was, I was so tired, at the end of the day, I used to fall asleep, and therefore I stopped going to the class. So the Rebbe writes to this person, and he says, first of all, there are times that you don't sleep, so you do gain something out of it. But I'm more disappointed in the fact that you didn't go to the class because you're upset that you fall asleep. And as you write in your letter, you have certain stress and pain that you're falling asleep in the class, and therefore you're not going to the class. So the Rebbe said like this: you should know, on Rosh Hashanah, on the new year, God puts down in the book of life how much money you're going to make, how much health you're going to have, how much success you're going to have. He also puts down how much stress you're going to have. Now, even though God puts down how much stress you're going to have, you still have a free choice where you could channel that stress. The stress could, God forbid, be channeled to difficulties in earning a living. The stress could be channeled, God forbid, in difficulties of health. Or God forbid, the stress could be channeled, I fell asleep at the Torah class. Or the stress could be, I have to get to the Torah class on time. But that's where the stress could be channeled. So you have the opportunity, and you have the free choice where to apply that stress. So to bless everybody to study Torah with joy, and should be stress-free, and to make a bracha before we study the Torah, and through this to be zoich and to merit the Torah Chadasha, Me'ite Teitzei, a greater Torah and a new Torah that will be revealed with the coming of Mashiach speedily in our days.